So our first speaker is Joel Peter Back, who is sitting next to me up here. So Joel, I'm going to hand over to you now to start us off and share with us a little bit about your latest research with SPARC. And Joel has a map on his PowerPoint to kick us off, to make it more interesting as well. So let's go. Do you want to use that one?
Right, thank you. This is Joel Back from South Sudan, also doing research in South Sudan. Just to give you a background, I'll use the map. So I did research in Borealis. So Borealis, the country I did research from, is also my birthplace and also where I'm from. My research was addressing adaptation to shocks like conflict and climate change, specifically floods. So you see Borealis, the distant parts of Borealis, like I can say, the northern part of Borealis is where the stormy vegetation of the Nile, locally referred to as Stonch, is. So previously, these are areas that used to experience flooding, but in the past 5 years, we are having flooding across the county. So for me, I'm actually from this area. We used to make jokes at this people decide that they are fish, but because of climate change, we are all now having to be fish. So also, if you look at this area, this is Unity State of my own county, predominantly occupied by the Nuer. This is occupied by the Nuer. Also, we have this is in Kawak, and also here is where the Western Barkers are occupied by Moral. The Moral, we are also legal groups. So in the last few years, over many decades, there's been a lot of conflict around this area during the dry season as we migrate livestock to this area. Also, fish, Boreal West, they all migrate to this area for dry season. So there's a lot of conflict here most times. Also, because of weather disputes between Boreal West and Boreal East, there's also been conflicts. But this seems to be stable now, so there's not been any conflict in 2017. But last year, there was a new conflict between Boreal East and Malawawa. This conflict is mostly fueled by the border issues, and also when we ask the Pakistan, they say this is mostly fueled by the politicians. So the study was done to see how this pastor is adapting to one, the flooding, and also two, the conflict. So we did a study in Boreal East, like I said, Morab State, between 2024 and 2025. So what did we find? In the aspect of flooding, we saw that flooding has become the new norm. Previously, flooding used to happen once every decade. So we had flooding in 1988, in 1998, in 2008. So people used to expect flood every 10 years. It just happened. But now it's every year. We're having floods every year from 2020, 2021, 2023, we're having floods in Boreal East and also other counties. So also this has led to increased food insecurity because of the disruption. So the floods are wiping out farmlands, shelter, destroying also a lot of increased livestock diseases. So some of these diseases are very new. And also the pastoralists do not know how to, for example, the historical diseases that they used to face, they know the herbs that they can apply to treat. But the new ones, they completely not. The surprise, they can't even recognize and name that this disease is this. So you just describe them. When we ask them some of the diseases, they will mention, like in a local language, you say a borok, means a swollen throat, or which means the lungs swell or the heart swell. They can only describe them, but they don't know the name of the disease because diseases are very new, which means they also cannot treat them. On the conflict element, we saw loss of livestock, so a lot of livestock get raided. For example, me and my dad last year, we lost about 46 to 50 cows through raids. This happens every year, but I'm not going to lie and say our pastors don't also just count the raid. I won't say only aspect of it. So the raid happened with, like I said in the map, during the dry season from February to June. So during the time when we're in the deep part of the dry season. That's why rain is very common than in the wet season. Also, loss of lives, and most of these people losing their lives are young people who are defending the cattle, who are grazing the cattle. And also young girls get targeted. So culturally, in our setting, when you get married, you pay over 100 cows. So that means it adds extra value on the young ladies, but it also becomes a target. So, for example, I'm not just coming as an example, if Carmen is my rival and she has a daughter, if I kill her daughter, that means she will potentially lose 100 cows. So you see, that puts a huge pressure on the girls to be targeted. For example, in 2024, when we had a conflict, a new young lady was targeted and killed because during the negotiation, they had negotiated over 240 cows for our wedding. So the rival group from Malawi targeted her and she was killed in an attempt that this family would lose 240 cows. Because if the girl has died, there's no negotiation. So a lot of this is having a lot of burden on the young men. A lot of displacement also is happening. I think in the interest of time, I said the roles of women are also changing. In the cattle camps previously, we will have young ladies, also mothers, will all migrate together to the cattle camps. But nowadays, because of the security and a lot of flooding, so many of these women who are married, they don't go to cattle camp. That means the young girl of 14 or 16 years will now do all the women's responsibilities in the camp, including providing food, milking, also carrying the young ones. And also, there's been also a bit of schooling coming up. So, and also the schooling, they prefer the young boys go to school than the young girls. So instead of the young boys grazing livestock, which is the young girls are grazing out of livestock. So we see a lot of these changes. Yes, everyone is impacted, but there's a lot of disproportionate impact on the young women. So how are they adapting? So the lady here is one of the people we discussed. We spoke to women leaders, women, and also camp leaders. How are they adapting? Migration, some of the ways we're adapting. When there is a lot of flooding, we move to the small highland areas or places that are not covered. Also, they have different, like there's a place called Wakich, which is a big cattle camp, far north. But now we avoid those areas. So when there's a lot of conflict or a lot of flooding, people change migration patterns. There are some camps they don't reach to, despite having more pasture. But if it's not safe, they can't go there. Also, hard splitting. Hard splitting is well, for example, if this table is a cattle camp, then the other table is a cattle camp, this is a cattle camp, I can decide to say, let us take 50 here, let us take 100 there, let us take 40 here. So in case this cattle camp is raided, there are 150 are safe. In case there's been a new disease because of the flooding, and all the cattle are lost, then there are 40. It is believed that, of course, you say go around the level, the cattle comes to have this outbreak at the same time. So some will die, some will survive. So that's how the cattle works. There's been construction of decks. This one is effective somewhat, but because people are not aware, decks are only constructed when the flooding has already come, instead of doing it early. Also, there has been, for women, they explain that sometimes if you eat in the morning or during dinner, then you cannot eat in the morning. Sometimes the food is given to children and the adults can stay without food. Also, for the conflict, there's information of different groups called Convened. Girl means protect or look after. So these young men of 16 are armed and they protect their cattle. When the rivals attack, they defend. So this is one of the ways of attacking the conflict. Also, there has been some peace initiatives conducted by the local chiefs. Like I said, in Korea West, since 2017, when there was the peace agreement between the local chiefs, up to now, there has been peace. So that means there is a bit of work. If we work toward this local chiefs and strengthen them, there's a possibility of achieving peace through the local leaders themselves. The takeaways, I would say, one of the things that we noticed was lacking was having early warning systems within, so that it can be included to the pastoralists that 2025 we will have flooding, especially around October, November. They can plan ahead. When they collect local herbs, maybe they can set up dikes in advance, which is not there now. Also, there's an request for capacity building pastoralists in terms of identifying and then also diagnosing these diseases. If they know what the diseases they likely will look for solutions. And also, these processes, there's need for capacity building of the local people, understand the rural role, and also they can understand the strength in staying together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's great. Now we're going to go straight to our second speaker, which is Claire Vidalion. Claire's a research and policy specialist with expertise in climate adaptation, livestock systems, pastoralism, dryland, water development, and governance. And she specialises also in the Eastern Horn of Africa. Claire's been working with SPARC on projects focused on gender livelihoods and markets, and on innovation to support resilience in dryland communities. And Claire also supports partners to prioritise and scale context-specific climate-smart innovations in the livestock sector. So Claire, let me pass the mic to you now, or the other mic, you can use either one, to share some highlights from your SPARC research. Do you want to talk to you? Perfect.
All right, hi everybody, welcome to the session. I'm Claire. I'm going to present on some work we've been doing with Mercy Corps colleagues in both Kenya and South Sudan, looking at the enablers of wind adaptation in Western Bahal Gazal state, also in South Sudan. So this presentation follows on quite nicely from Charles. It's in a different area. But it looks at similar issues, but goes further into reasons behind the adaptation strategies and so on, or the enablers of adaptation strategies. Sorry. Okay, so all right, we did the study in the neighbouring state. In Western Bahal Gazal, specifically in Wau and Jura River counties. So Wau is traditionally a livestock community, whereas Jura River has a lot more farming going on. Both these areas are, I would describe as peri-urban because they're within the field sites we went to were within 2 or 3 hours from Wau, and Wau being the second largest city in South Sudan. So there's an influence of the market, of the town. So it's a peri-urban environment, there's growing market economy, cash needs, and so we see a lot more business and trade coming in beyond the on-farm activities. So we did qualitative research, which were predominantly interviews and some focus groups, and this was just earlier this year in March. So a previous study in the same area had looked at the different shocks and how people were adapting. So similar to Charles' study, saw that there was a lot of conflict, climate, economic shocks. But this study specifically wanted to look at what are the enablers how specifically are women adapting and changing roles, and what are the enabling factors that enable them to do that? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so what are women doing? So, oh jeez, doing very well with the. Okay, so women are doing multiple different activities. They're diversifying beyond their on-farm activities into a number of different activities, including the income-generating activities, such as getting involved in restaurant, tea businesses, setting up small businesses such as tailoring, bread baking, salons. They're also doing wage labour, having a small kiosk at home or having a shop in the market, and doing some natural resource extraction such as grass cutting, charcoal burning, and so on. So a number of these activities that perhaps they used to do, they're doing more for sales. So if they were for household use, they're now for sales, such as the natural resource harvesting, the crop farming. crop farming was really the major activity in both of the camps we went to, which was a surprising factor. But then looking more into the context, livestock holdings have really been reduced by conflict over the last couple of decades, and then since independence. So households have actually reduced their livestock holdings because there's been a risk in terms of raising theft. So now crop farming was really perceived as the main kind of activity to feed the family. So women combine these activities throughout the year. They concentrate on crop farming during the wet season, and then in the dry season, when needs change, the lean season, they focus on the income generating activities, the small businesses, and so on. So they're flexible and adaptive. Okay, so some of the findings. We found increasingly that women said that they were the primary providers for the family, for the household, for food security, for school fees, especially as men were stepping back in a way, either because of migration with their livestock, migration to towns for jobs, because of conflict, because of injury, because of death. A lot of people who were working with the government, the men had also not been paid for the last year. So the women were now having to take up that role of providing for the family. So we saw that this was a necessity-driven and adaptive response, these different activities, but we also saw how women were being active, adaptive, and innovating, shaped by the different constraints and opportunities that were in their environment. And as a result, they had increased decision-making within the households as the husbands did value the contribution they were bringing to the household. However, there was still social resistance, especially at the community level, about women getting involved in the market, and some stigma, jealousy, and community resistance to it. We also found that widows tend to have greater autonomy to take up some of these activities. They step outside of some of the traditional gender norms. So we found that they were some of the first adopters of these new roles. Okay, so what were the enablers of the adaptation strategies? We found that the first three seem to be the ones that were coming out strongly. So the social networks and the peer support within the community. So the networks where women would rely on food, would rely on ideas, moral support, caregiving. This was really key. As was the support of household dynamics, particularly from the husband. So where he collaborated or valued her contribution, there was more of a partnership in the household, either by providing resources into the activities or supporting them morally. And also self-efficacy, so a woman's confidence in her own abilities, that she was able to step into something new. A lot of women talked about this, and it seemed to have a positive effect on her activities. And then the other three were also important: the education, the skills, access to capital and assets, such as land, inputs, finance, as well as market access and being able to get to the market too. So just a couple of action points to finish on. Okay, so firstly is to support and strengthen what women are already doing. So these flexible, adaptive strategies, which should be built on and worked with as the basis for bringing in any extra support, recognizing as well the structural barriers that they face in terms of access to land or inputs. And then to provide context-specific training tailored specifically to the kinds of activities they want to get into. So training, skills and mentoring. We also found the importance of the social networks to really work with these existing networks, ones that enhance peer support, collective action, and information sharing between women. And finally, investing in the gender transformative approaches, where there's shared dialogue and participation of men and women to promote women's leadership and increase decision making in both the household and the community. Thank you.
Now, don't put that mic down, but you kind of got a seat, because I want to ask you a follow-up question now. I was particularly interested in what you were saying about the importance of supportive household dynamics. And I wonder if you could share with us a little bit more, which you might sit down as well, so as you're having a panel conversation here. What influence women's evolving livelihoods in study having on gender roles, specifically in the household and in the community, and then given the importance, as you highlighted, of supportive household dynamics, are there barriers around there as well, or is it quite a positive trend that you're seeing?
Okay, yeah, so we spoke to both women and their husbands in the field, and we found that the household, the supportive household dynamics, particularly from the husband, was really important. And as I was saying, where there's a partnership, where they're collaborating, this really had an impact on women being able to get involved in new activities, maybe through having some finance coming from crops, or just through moral support and planning advice. So within the household, we found that this seemed to be a positive change emerging. And direct interviews, men and women tended to say that yes, within the household there was more decision making and support for the women to do the activities. However, they would also talk indirectly about the community attitudes toward getting involved in these activities. So, for example, how it's not good that my wife goes to that it's not, people in the community say it's not good that my wife goes to the market. She should be staying at home, the children will be alone. She'll be getting involved in the wrong things, prostitution and so on. So there was these community perceptions that seemed to be more difficult to shift and change. So as much as we were seeing perhaps these changing gender roles and norms happening in household, in the community level they still seem to persist and slower perhaps to change.
Thanks so much, Claire. Now, as we've seen, the 2 studies have taken place in neighbouring states. So I want to pass over to Chol with a follow-up question for you here. And, you know, based also not just on your own research, but what Claire's just been sharing about changes in gender roles. So how have gender roles in the cattle camps been impacted by the floods and conflict events that we've studied? And then, you know, to what extent are they being supported within the households and within the communities, the changes in gender roles that are taking place? So I think if you could share a bit on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, like I mentioned earlier, what is happening is that with all these shocks, floods, and conflicts, there has been an attempt to adapt. For example, you find that most men don't take their wives to the cattle camps. What it does is that they take the young girls to go to the cattle camps. Now, these young girls are doing all the roles that previously they would share with their mothers or with the other women they are together in the cattle camp. So there's been a lot of work for them. Also, because of conflicts, young men that used to graze, calves and also other cows, are now instead joining forces at the front line to defend the livestock. So what that means that the girls are now having to graze. So predominantly among the leaders, you will not find young girls grazing previously. But nowadays it is common to find young girls grazing because their brothers are fighting to defend the girls. So there's been a lot of responsibilities put on them, and also them now being also a target, like I explained previously. In terms of support, there is not much support, I would say, within the household. Because now if you take your newly wedded wives, you go to the cattle camp, that's a big, they think that's a bigger risk. So maybe the newly wedded wives are being protected by the main back home, but the young girls are not getting that same protection. They are actually being exploited.
Thanks very much, Tom. We might put the projector on again, if that's right, and we'll hear from our third speaker, Tom Caputo. So Tom is a mixed methods researcher with over a decade of experience in fragile settings, and he specializes in data-driven strategies to enhance stakeholder decision-making and development programs, also looking at designing enterprise-level information systems. Change some of the page over there. I've not memorized all of these. Looking at facilitating real-time data analysis for decision making. Tom has been involved in various RCTs and quality experimental studies with a particular focus on adolescents and youth. So that's what we're going to hear from Tom. You're going to talk to us about your research on adolescents and youth that you've been doing as far. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you so much for coming to this session. Yeah, my name is Tom, and I work with Pacific. Today, I'm going to be taking you through our study. This is a desk review. The title of our study is Supporting Adolescent Girls in Conflict Areas, as well as areas and contexts facing climate issues in East and West Africa. Okay, so our desk review looks at various interventions and approaches that have proven to support psychosocial as well as the financial well-being of adolescents and youth, especially girls in conflict-affected areas. The study was conducted between May 2024 to July 2025. And we also have key informants. We spoke to experts who have had experience in these areas, and they gave us perspectives and reflections around what's happening in those areas. Okay, so when we look at our findings, we looked at the evidence that have been published, as well as data that gives us suggested, or to give us that ability to learn from the data. And what we are looking is adolescent girls are now facing myriad of challenges, including climate-related shocks. We are seeing these shocks affecting their mental health. Data suggests that adolescent girls have lost access to livelihoods. They can no longer go to school because of different climate shocks, and it's also affecting their mental health. We're also looking at displacements. I think this has been cited by my colleagues and my fellow researchers. We are seeing adolescent girls being displaced, issues around early childhood marriages happening, and this often exacerbates, is exacerbated by lack of income, lack of adequate food in their households, and also grazing of their cattle and livestock. We're also seeing data telling us that livestock are being lost due to different factors. Oftentimes, conflict related with cattle riding indicates that families, households are now losing their cattle to raiders and other communities. So this conflict is often putting a lot of pressure, especially on the households. We know that these adolescent girls are often tokenized by livestock, especially when it comes to marriage. So oftentimes we're looking at adolescent girls being married off at an early age to support the independence of the household when it comes to economic matters. We're also looking at this context. We're seeing a lot of deliberately or failure to deliberately look at inclusively supporting adolescent girls in financial related interventions. So we're seeing different models around savings, around credit facilities, often excludes young women and adolescent girls, especially when it comes to financial services. So this is an area that is also affecting adolescent girls and young women. The other thing we're looking at is food security. Oftentimes, due to conflict and climate change issues, agricultural lands are now being they are facing challenges. You know, food production is something that is also affected in some of these households. We are looking at adolescent girls facing challenges around like they're not able to afford the daily food within their households. So this is something that is affecting things like, for example, going to school. It's affecting their ability to become a bit more healthy and their physical health and ultimately their psychosocial well-being. However, we have seen some evidence-informed approaches that supports their well-being. One, when we bring evidence tells us when we bring humanity into designing interventions with the communities, ensuring that you're building these interventions for the adolescent girls, and not just because we want to fix something that is temporary. Evidence tells us that elements like, for example, looking at their mental health, integrating mental health and their psychosocial well-being in interventions supports long-term sustainability as well as impact at household and community levels. We also see evidence suggesting and telling us that we need to address the social norms and the barriers, especially perceptions around young women and girls, their roles in the community, including them in their in the day-to-day decision making at household level is also something that data tells us should we include local voices, including the voices of the girls in the day-to-day decision making, then that implies long-term impact and sustainability. We're also looking at evidence telling us, and this is what we've learned, investing in integrated approaches, looking at a multi-pronged approach in addressing challenges facing adolescents and young people should and will build long-term resilience for adolescent girls. So looking at integrating financial literacy, building their life skills and their confidence, they should be able to be aware about what's facing them in the face of shocks and stresses of lives. Looking at conflict, looking at climate change issues, looking at discrimination, the deliberate discrimination. These are things that build their ability to respond to the shocks and stresses of lives. And it's something that should be taken seriously when it comes to investing in different approaches to support adolescents, girls, and young women. Localization. I think this aspect has been spoken about a couple of times. But what does it really mean to localize interventions? So data suggests that when we build interventions and approaches for supporting resilience of adolescent girls at local levels, there's long-term sustainability and impact. We are seeing interventions that have worked at household level, at community level, and broader systems, local governments, as well as gatekeepers, religious leaders, all these groups of people at local levels. We are seeing these interventions promising to address the issues of long-term impact and sustainability. In terms of the findings, I think I've spoken broadly more about them in my previous slide, but just as a key takeaway, we need to respond to adolescent girls' mental health and challenges and needs, including their psychosocial well-being. We need to address the social norms and barriers that limit adolescent girls and young women in terms of penetrating and also supporting their households in the faces of economic hardships through integrated approaches. Integration, sequence layering, we're looking at promoting adolescent girls' financial well-being, access to health services, as well as promoting an enabling environment for their education well-being. One of the studies that we looked at suggests that keeping a girl through secondary school means a lot in that particular household. And also looking at the community structures and collaboration within the local context, which is quite important for these interventions. Yeah, we also had some gaps and some recommendations. Oftentimes we've looked at interventions to be short-term and poorly designed for the context of climate change, as well as conflict shocks. We're also looking at, in most cases, the resilience aspect really lacked a lot of the documentation, and this needs more attention by researchers. Some of our recommendations, we're looking at scaling multi-sectoral programming across these different contexts, as well as adapting interventions to local markets, looking at sexual reproductive health, psychosocial well-being, and building long-term research for future documentation of impact.
It's great to hear about your work, particularly looking at youth. That's, we've talked about gender a lot, and often the focus is on women, and then actually looking at the issues for, younger women is very important, but often neglected areas. So thanks very much for that. I think we'll just go straight to our next speaker. And I do apologise that we seem to be competing with a distance, but luckily we've got the mic, so hopefully no one's having any problems here. So I'm going to invite Renee Bullock to come up and talk with us about research she's been doing for SPARC on gender transformative approaches across pastoralists in West Africa. Renee is a senior scientist at ILRI, working on issues of social inclusion, gender and climate adaptation. She's been working in Africa for over 10 years and has supported the design and implementation of gender responsive and gender transformative projects in mixed livestock and dryland systems. So welcome, Renee.
Thank you. I hope I don't have the same challenge. Okay, so pointed at the, oh, I think you're, there we go. Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. My name is Renee Bullock. The work that we have been very much committed to in the last 6 months or so is with a few ILRI colleagues who are not here today, and we also have a consultant who's been helping us. So what I will be presenting today is some of the work that's in progress of publication, and thank you for attending. So I'm just to one. Just press it. Okay, here we go. I think already from some of the presentations, the topics that I'll discuss are already a little bit in the room. There was some mention of gender transformative approaches in some of the previous slides. And I think what those are was very important in defining those for this particular review, and also even in the language that we use, talking about projects, interventions, and aims, especially. So transformative approaches are about social changes, norms and roles and relations. So the norms being the beliefs that guide practices. And I think we have to recognize that some of the assumptions we have, we should test those. I think that earlier in the morning, that was one of the things. We're looking at narratives and changing those. Norms in pastoral systems are not always patriarchal. They are changing. There are spaces in which changes are occurring through local motivations for one reason or another. Transformative approaches try to adjust and change some of the more patriarchal norms that exist to something that's more egalitarian or equitable. So more equitable outcomes, say in resilience, would be an idea, a sort of goal. So transformative approaches address the root causes of some of the gender-based inequities, structural barriers, say access to education that we've also heard about, and aims to challenge harmful structures. And in pastoral societies and communities, those do sometimes exist. They're compounded by often marginalized spatial, where these communities live are often not having easy access to services. So that's kind of what transformation is. Let's see. Let's do that. So transformative approaches, and we'll get there, but there is in the middle a framework that we use, this one. Some of you may have heard of the RBET framework. It's gaining some popularity. I won't spend too much time on it, but it helps unpack project aims, goals, and outcomes. And we use this because it's very practical, very user-friendly. It helps us get beyond understanding who projects reach. In this case, we adapted the framework a bit to look at pastoral institutions and different groups within pastoral communities. The benefits, trainings, financial capacities typically fall under benefits. Empowerment is when a project might adjust or change, strategically try to change women's roles in decision-making. Control over resources is a common one. Transformative, and we've heard it a little bit today, engaging men and women to actively challenge some norms and beliefs that can drive practices that result in inequitable conditions and opportunities. So the RBET was implemented in our project as a way to unpack resources. We assumed that we wouldn't have a lot of published information on transformative approaches in pastoral areas in Africa, in SPARC specific countries. So the SPARC, this is limited to the SPARC countries in Africa. So we didn't consider Syria or Yemen for this. So we had the desk review, and then we also collected primary data through key informant interviews and stakeholder workshops. Some of you may have been invited or certainly participated in our efforts to ask you some more questions about your work, your projects, recognizing that publications take time. So for all of the sources of data that we collected, the authors, we use the RBET framework to unpack the information we had to assess transformation. Is it really there? And would it be included in our final review? So I was just wanting to be very concise and short. in summary, we had a total of 18 included interventions, and amongst the geographies in which we looked, very uneven. Mauritania, for example, had no information through either sources. This is consistent with some others' finding of the uneven geography of research and interventions. Yeah, there's still a long way to go. Very much layered. We've heard a little bit today already. GTAs are typically layered in already existing sectoral or multi-sectoral approaches. They're never as a standalone. So they kind of layer in and often complement, if it's nutrition or health related intervention, they often work alongside of those. So that's just the overview. But out of our review, we found 5 key messages. They somewhat align to project design. So the first one being what occurs prior to an intervention. So intersectional research approaches should highlight the complexity of unique and pastoral specific power dynamics. So one of the things that I've heard quite a bit about and I want to challenge is what is a household in a pastoral setting? I've worked in pastoral areas. This is still even confusing for me. A household is typically multiple families and kin with mobility. It adds this other layer of who is where. I've heard something about protection, where the men are who protect the women, where the young people move. So households, we did not see a reference to this complexity in our intervention. This shapes everything, basically steps 2 through 4. Who do you engage? Why? What are your budgets for those people for more practical reasons? So I think a deeper engagement with family structures could occur, say, prior to starting an intervention and then informing an intervention, and age and generation. Disproportionate vulnerabilities exist. And age is such an important feature in most pastoral communities in Africa. So rites of passage, all of this relates to power, these set power relations that affect agency and choice in how to adapt or how to innovate, for example. So I think this is really a foundational aspect to explore. The second recommendation, multi-generational approaches. Yes, engaging with different family members in ways that try to support equitable choice making. It's a difficult space to understand, but I think these multi-generational approaches, if we are very intentional about those, they can be more inclusive. And also to highlight again the flexibility of norms. So norms within a younger age group and the elders who often bear and strongly influence a whole community's practices, it's important to engage with different age groups for different reasons, as whatever the GTA and the other interventions may set forth. So the third key message is to amplify pastoral voice and agency in program and intervention design. So I think there are ways to bring in certain important people in shaping the GTAs, especially that sociocultural norms are very locally and very local and context specific. So they have to be championed by somebody within the community. They're not going to fare well if they're top-down approaches. And locally embedded and driven, I think, by and for people from within the communities. So if they're more engaged in the design of programs, it can help support the sustainable social changes that people want. So this is, again, something the interventions didn't necessarily highlight as much in our review. The fourth one is capacity development aims and activities should support the empowerment of pastoralists and the capacities to address challenges. There were capacity development across the 18 interventions was a major feature. However, there are a few perennial challenges in pastoral systems, conflict being one, main one that brings us here today and a big topic. And we didn't see a strong or consistent way in which GTAs embed into conflict resolution aimed interventions. One case in West Africa, I think in Nigeria, had women really championing peace talks between different religious groups. I think there's a lot more potential in using GTAs in a way to address some of the macro challenges and persistent problems. So capacity development also multi-tiered and cross skills. The last one is kind of it can be iterative, but also at the end of a project design, overall improvements and evidence of impacts, knowing what works, where, how, and why, and mixed methods being incorporated more, because actually it's one of the reasons that some of the many sources that we looked at weren't included. There wasn't an evidence base, and we did consider blogs and other less sort of scientific materials for this, but it was very difficult to find people being very explicit in writing up what is the transformative intervention, and moreover, how did it work well and not, or for whom. So there's a lot of digital discussion going on. So maybe more innovative approaches to monitoring and evaluation adapted to mobile populations through perhaps digital tools and such might be a good space to explore. And that is the end.
Take it away and join us here. So I wanted to throw a question over to Tom, picking up from some of the things that Renee has just talked about. So Tom, you explained really well about the adolescent skills issues, but can you tell us in a nutshell, and particularly in light of what Renee's been talking about, the importance of multi-generational approaches, you know, kind of working with across the generations, but why should we prioritize investment specifically in adolescent girls' well-being in fragile household context? And again, you know, picking up from something Renee raised about the importance of amplifying different voices, if we're trying to focus on adolescents, but we also be mindful of the importance of multi-generational approaches, how can we amplify the voices of the young men and women within programs? Yeah, you can share with that.
Thank you so much, Liz. I think the big question around why we should invest in adolescent girls, especially in this context, you know, it takes us back to understanding that, you know, first, these are the future leaders in those areas. Two, we're looking at building interventions to break the cycle of poverty in different households. Investing in adolescent girls means sustaining them in school through education. It means building them and bridging that gender inequality aspect, especially within these areas. It means you know, bringing them into the space where they can speak freely about themselves, they can build their social network, they can build their social capital. All these are assets that have been proven to build the resilience of different communities, households, and individuals. So we're looking at that as the broader reason why we should bring in adolescent girls, especially in this context where we've seen data telling us and we've learned that, you know, adolescents are now being left out deliberately. So I think it's easier said than done in some of these areas, but I think it's really, really important for us to really look at that and continue the impact of these adolescents even in their futures. When we look at bringing the local voices, evidence have shown us that the more you include local voices, parents, gatekeepers, and the male change agents, they do help in terms of breaking the aspects of the familial social norms that are affected households, that are affected communities, and we are looking at interventions having these aspects to break the different social norms that we have. Social norms could relate to things like early childhood marriage, to early marriages, as well as empowerment. What extent are adolescent girls, for example, and young women allowed to own assets in some of these communities when it comes to ownership? For example, here in Kenya, we know that the Constitution has placed matrimonial property, including cattle and the household assets, as joint, like owned jointly between the husband and wife, the spouse. But in some of these communities, oftentimes it's the husbands who make decision when it comes to matters affecting the adolescent girl as well as their spouse. And we know that in majority of these households, young women are, I think, women are married at a very young age. And so I think it's something that we really need to amplify in our program.